Hello everyone, it's JMac here, and today we're going to be talking about Chapter 3. Now, the first part of Chapter 3, they talk about configuring the ASA, and you can do it two ways, either through the CLI or the ASDM. Now, the initial configuration has to be done through the CLI because there is no IP address on the ASA by default, and there has to be an IP address on the ASA in order to get in through the ASDM. So through the CLI or the command line interface, there's three ways to get in. You can console in, you can telnet in, or you can SSH in. Now consoling in is what we initially do to set up the IP address, and we use the light blue cable because everything else, the telnet or the SSH, you still have to have an IP address on the ASA. So when you get a brand new ASA, you have to use the blue console cable to get in. Okay, second one is telnet. You know, what is telnetting into the ASA as opposed to consoling in? Well, let me show you. All right, here I have a very simple networking packet tracer. I've got my PC, and my PC is console cabled into my router, and then my router has a serial cable into somebody else's router, and we'll pretend that the serial cable is the internet or the T1 line that we bought. And then over there at their network, they have a switch, and then they have another PC. So I can go to my PC and hit terminal. And now I'm consoling into my router. And obviously it says my router. But now when we say telnet into another router, you can set up other devices through Cisco to allow you to remote access them from another device. So from here I can do enable, and now again I'm still in my router. So now I can telnet to the IP address of the other guy, and the password, and boom, now I'm in the other router. So obviously I'm on my PC, I'm consoled into my router, but then from my router I can telnet into the other router. This is typically how we remote manage our network. You know, we don't make all these different connections to all these other devices and have 5 or 6 windows open. You can actually just go from your device, you can go in, console into yours, and then you can telnet into whatever device you want. And you can have multiple telnet windows open as well. But that's beyond the scope of this course. But at least now you see it. And then when you want to get out, you just type exit, and boom, you're back into my router. So that's the big difference with telnet. When we use a terminal emulation program like PuTTY or HyperTerminal, that is a telnet program, but we're just using it to telnet locally to an attached line. And then when they say telnet, again, they're talking about telnetting from one device to another through it's more of a remote thing, where this is more of a local connection thing. All right, and then their last item, the SSH connection here that they mentioned. By default, telnet can have a password, but that password is transmitted in clear text, which means anybody sniffing your network would be able to pick up that password, and then they would be able to see the other stuff, and they would actually be able to get into your routers. So SSH is a secure way of connecting remotely to a device, and it encrypts the packets as they go across so that everything's encrypted, so that anybody that would sniff your packets would not get caught. So again, console cable, you're locally connecting. Telnet, you're remoting in, but it's clear text. And then SSH if you want a secure way to connect remotely. So once you configure that initial IP address, then there's a few other settings to activate the ASDM. ASDM stands for Adaptive Security Device Manager. And it's stored on your flash as ASDM version number .bin. So here you can see an example. ASDM version number would be 6.21, and it's a bin file. Now remember, your ASA, your Cisco operating software or the iOS, is ASA 8.21 K8 bin. So that's your iOS, and then this is your ASDM. So you cannot use the web configuration unless this file is on your flash card. And if you don't have it, let me know in class, and I'll transfer that over to your flash card for you. All right, another thing your book talks about are the different modes. And as far as the ASA and most Cisco equipment, there are 5 modes. There's user mode, which is identified by the greater than sign. There's privilege mode that says the number sign. Now privilege mode is where you do your show commands, things like that. Configuration, again, you're setting configuration settings for the router, like the host name. And then sub-configuration, you're in a sub-command, either an interface. So first you go to config and you would do, host name and give the router a name. Then you would hit config or do interface Ethernet 00. And now you're actually in that interfaces configuration, so that's why they call it a sub-configuration. So the configuration mode concerns the entire router. The sub-configuration is just a portion of the router. So again, configuration, I can change the host name, which affects the whole router. Sub-configuration, I'm only in one specific interface. And then there's ROM-MON. Whenever it can't find a startup configuration file to run, and it can't find anything, it just boots into what they call a ROM-MON mode. That way it can still boot and you can still do a few things. All right, from user mode, there's only about 5 to 8 commands you can use, and none of them are very useful. So most of us go right to privilege. So you have to type in enable. To go to configuration, you have to do config space T, which is configure terminal. And then for the sub-configuration, you just pick whatever interface you want to go to. So interface space Ethernet 00, things like that. So make sure you know these 3 prompts. They're always on the CCNA, and they're a favorite test question all over the place. All right, next we're going to talk about the license key. Now, the license key obviously dictates what features are on the ASA. And to view your license key, you just do show version. And then if you look at the bottom, your license key is there. So bringing up my ASA, first I enable. And then I do a show ver. And at the very bottom, there's my license key. So to show it, show version. Now, if you want to change your activation key, you have to go into global config or config mode, and then you just do activation-key space, and then you type in the new key. So if you were to buy one of those security up licenses, when you'd get a little envelope, you would open that up, and your activation key would be in there, and then you'd enter that big hexadecimal number, and then it would activate all those new features for you. So again, to view your license key, show version. To change your activation key, you type in activation-key. All right, by default, when the ASA first comes up, there is a telnet password configured. It is Cisco. The SSH has a default username, and it is PIX, P-I-X. In the enable mode, to get into privilege mode, there is no password by default. You would just hit enter, and it just goes in blank. So make sure you know those default passwords. Obviously, those are always exam questions as well. All right, then once you're into the router and you put an IP address on there, you can enable the ASDM by typing these 2 commands. It's an HTTP enable or server enable, and then obviously you have to assign it an IP address and then tell it whether it's the inside, outside, or DMZ. And then you can open up your web browser and you can connect through HTTPS : the IP address / admin. By default, depending on how you have this set up, if you've just set up an enable password so far, there will be no username, and then you'll use an enable password. So let me show you what this looks like. All right, so once you're in the ASA, again, you want to go into configuration mode and type in HTTP server space enable. And then once you hit enter, everything should be fine. And then you want to actually put in where you're going to direct your stuff. So I'm going to direct my HTTP to 192.168.1.1 with my subnet mask, and it's on the inside interface. So then once I hit enter, boom, that's all set. Now you may see a warning, don't worry about that. But now I'm set up, I can now use the ASDM software. So if I open up my web browser and point it, now again, I'm directly into my ASA, so I won't see anything on the internet, and change it to, again, 192.168.1.1/admin, and there's a S, so don't forget that S because else it won't work. Now, depending on what version of Internet Explorer you have, mine obviously comes up with a certificate issue because I haven't configured any certificate on my ASA. Click here to the website, and here you go. So you could install the launcher and run the ASDM software on your local PC, or you can just run it as a web application. I'm just going to run it as a web application. Obviously, for class, you probably want to install that and have that running, and that way you're always set. So click on yes on the little warnings. Keep waiting. And there you go. So by default, when this comes up, let me close out everything else. By default, when this comes out, there is no username, and I'm just using my enable password to get in. Now, if you've set up a username, you need to use that, but obviously if you didn't, it's just your enable password. Oh, I hate when that happens. All right, let's try this, and there we go. All right, so again, you can run it as a web app or you can run it as a local